for Market podcast.
Farmers are really out there interacting with the natural world that is being so devastated by climate change and finding the places where they can actually make changes. So Tom and I have been reading a lot about Stoic philosophy in the past couple of years as we've gone through this, and found a lot of solace in this idea of starting with yourself and your own actions and realizing that's really what you have control over. So it's this kind of discernment between what is beyond our control and what is within our control. And I think so much of the time we're spending our energy thinking about and worrying about all these things we can't control. And that energy could all be spent on what we can control. And so I think farmers just like naturally do that because so much typically goes wrong during any given season, that there is this kind of fortitude, there's this persistence, like making the choice in the moment about what we're going to sacrifice, what we're going to focus on, and continuing to move forward. And I think everyone is going to need to kind of absorb some of that ethic. And I think that's what really farmers have to teach more than anything, is that ability to move forward in the face of challenges.
Hello and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing vegetables and flowers for local markets like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, and local wholesaling. I'm Katie Kula, your host and a writer for Growing for Market magazine. For 33 years, the magazine for flower and vegetable market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free.
Hi, this is Nathan from Tilth Soil. We are a worker-owned co-op in Cleveland, Ohio, making living soils approved for certified organic growing. Our mixes are based on NOP-compliant compost we make from the 4,000 tons of food scraps we keep out of landfills every year. Instead of throwing food in the trash, we respect farmers and the land by putting those scraps back into production as compost. Just like quality vegetable farming, it takes hard work and dedication, but the results speak for themselves. Get excellent germination, strong transplants, and help us feed people, not landfills. Try a free bag and check out our pre-sale for the 25 season at tilthsoil.com. Okay, I'm done. Play the jingle.
I'm in my garden, the sun is shining, my plants are thriving in Tilth Soil.
I don't know about you, but I got into farming to grow food, not to spend my time creating pack lists, writing newsletters, responding to emails, or maintaining web stores. If I could spend less time on my phone and computer and more time farming, that would be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for CSA farmers. It takes care of the admin, managing orders, customer communications, and automating tedious tasks so you can get back to doing what you love. On average, Farmhand saves CSA farmers 6 hours a week. That's 6 hours you could spend with your family, out in the field, or simply taking a breather. So, what would you do with an extra 6 hours? Now's the time to get your systems ready for next season. Learn how Farmhand can help at farmhand.partners/GFM. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. I am so excited to welcome Bootstrap Farmer as a sponsor of the podcast. I've known them for a dozen years, and if anyone tells you nothing is made in the USA anymore, well, they're headquartered and warehoused in Paris, Texas. They make their own all-metal, all-inclusive greenhouse frames of steel made in the USA and fabricated in Texas, and their heavy-duty, reusable propagation and microgreens trays are Midwest-made. With a complete range of supplies, they have just about everything for propagation and growing, including heat mats, ground cover, frost blankets, silage tarps, irrigation, and trellising. Want to color code your seed starting flats? They've got heavy-duty trays that will last for years in a full range of colors, great for keeping farm seedlings separate from retail or just for fun. And they have an experienced team of growers to support everything they sell. If you've heard of the NRCS High Tunnel Initiative providing grants for hoop houses, but have been put off by the paperwork, Bootstrap Farmer has a guide that will walk you through the application process so you can get your hoop house funded this winter. For all that and more, check out Bootstrap Farmer at bootstrapfarmer.com.
Hello, everyone. Today I am talking with Maud Powell, who co-owns and operates Wolf Gulch Farm in the Applegate Valley of Southern Oregon. Maud has also been teaching with OSU Extension's Small Farms program for the past 17 years, and she started the OSU Extension Ag Climate, Grief, and Support Initiative. Maud was inspired in this program by personal experience with her own farm. For over 2 decades, Wolf Gulch Farm grew produce for local markets, ran a CSA program, improved and produced hundreds of seed varieties, and trained dozens of new farmers through an internship program. But after all that success, they had to leave their original land. I'm going to let Maud tell that story and how it is wrapped up in her new work around climate grief. Maud, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad to have you here to talk about this important topic today.
Thanks so much, Katie, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Maud, let's start at the beginning as always. We'll talk a lot about your current project around climate grief and support, but I think it's really important for us to understand your farming story too. Can you share about how you and your husband, Tom, first got into farming and the origins of Wolf Gulch Farm?
Yes, I'd love to tell you. So take us all the way back to the summer of 1997, and Tom and I were in the Himalayan mountains backpacking for a month. And while we were there, found out about a program where you could work on a farm, on a family farm in the region of northern India known as Ladakh, which is situated on the Tibetan plateau, but politically part of the country of India. So we were intrigued and we decided to spend 3 weeks working on this family farm. They primarily grew barley, but they also had a huge vegetable garden. They grew some wheat and potatoes, and then they had a lot of livestock. And we just fell in love with farming. We were farming up at about 13,000 feet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they get 3 inches of rainfall a year, so they're reliant on glacier melt primarily for their irrigation water. The soils were pretty poor, as I recall. It's been a while, obviously, but we just loved it. We loved the lifestyle. We loved being outside all the time and working with plants and animals. And pretty much then and there decided that we wanted to become farmers. So we came home, and then in the summer of 1998, we did internships on a couple of different produce CSA farms down in Southern Oregon, and were able to buy some property with my sister and her husband, and my mom helped us out. So it was a family affair. But we did end up buying kind of marginal farmland. It's not even considered, it's not EFU land, it's exclusive farm use, it's woodland resource. So more of a forested property with some large meadows that had been grazed historically. But we were young and excited, and we were inspired by the idea of growing food on more marginal land, with the idea that a lot of the farmland in Oregon was being paved over for housing. And we'd have to really be able to start growing food with, less of that prime farmland. So pretty early on, we bought the property and there was a decent amount of water. We had the only water right to Wolf Gulch. We felt pretty confident, and we just set about growing food. And yeah, we used a lot of permaculture features in the design of our property. So hedgerows and swales to capture water. We used a subsoil plow to help develop the topsoil. And we did encounter drought in 2001. That summer, we had about a third of the rainfall, the winter before. So we ended up needing to line our ponds to catch the winter rainfall because our creek was kind of intermittent at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just went on to farm, and we raised our 2 wonderful children on the property, and we ran a cooperative CSA with about 300 CSA members at its height, and started growing some seeds and just really built this beautiful land. Grew lots of perennials. So the hedgerows were full of nitrogen fixing ceanothus shrubs and fruit trees and nuts and habitat for birds. And it was just, we loved the land. We loved tending the land. But then, we started to see this trend. We started to get this drought on the West Coast, a number of droughty years in a row. And then in 2017, our creek actually dried up and never came back. So that was really the first major sign that climate change had hit us. And we were looking at really reduced irrigation. So at that point, we started shifting. We'd slowly been shifting into growing more seed than produce. And I think about that year, we started growing exclusively seeds because we're certified organic. So we're able to sell organic seeds to about 6 or 7 companies around the country on contract. And the seeds, we can cut off the irrigation depending on the crop in late July or August. So it meant less irrigation water. And so, yeah, we shifted entirely to seed crops. We were at that point, all irrigating on drip, no overhead at all gravity fed. And again, using the subsoil plow, which increased the water holding capacity of the soil. So really doing everything we possibly could to conserve water. We're collecting all of the water off our barn and house roofs and storing them in tanks. Tom, in the early years when we weren't making enough farm income, ran an irrigation business. So he's got his irrigation license and he's really good with water, which came in handy.
Uh-huh.
And then it was during the heat dome. It was in 2021, that June and July. And we were out of water. We were pumping water from our lower pond, which was the bigger pond, up to the upper pond so we could gravity feed. We ended up having to buy water off the farm. So we had these water trucks coming up our driveway. And we just looked at each other and just said, we just can't farm here anymore.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that heat dome was a record event. I mean, how hot did it get at your farm during that event?
I think it got to 118 was the highest.
Yeah.
And I think it was something, I always forget the numbers. I think for 17 days, it didn't get below 105. The high was above 105.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And it was so much work. We were losing crops, but not only that, it was double the work to keep them alive. So it was like, it was no longer practical. And yeah, it was such a gut punch. It just, and it was Tom who first said it. And he's the one, I'm a little bit more like wishy-washy. There have been times when we were raising our kids and it was so remote. And I thought, God, I wish we lived closer to town. And he was adamant, and he would say to me, he'd say, the topsoil on our property is our third child.
Oh.
We cannot leave. The topsoil. And he had picked out his burial spot on the property. And, we were there for life. That really was kind of our highest ideal, was like, you pick a place on the planet and you tend it. You put your roots down and you stay. And we, in our young idealism, we felt like the ills of the world stem from people just up and moving when things get tough, and that really committing to a place was the thing to do. And so then and for me, especially because we were there for 25 years and I had gone through these periods of struggle, and then finally our kids were raised and I was like, okay, this is my home. And then to have that happen was really devastating on a personal level, and then devastating to realize millions of people are going through this, are real climate refugees. I would never take that title because we have all these options and resources. And we certainly didn't have to flee in the night because of a flood or a wildfire, but plenty of people do. So realizing kind of existentially, like, all right, climate change is here and we can't farm on this property that we've spent everything on, our money and all of our energy, life energy.
Yeah. Oh, it's for sure like a death, right? I mean, in terms of the emotional impact of thinking this is your place and then having to change that. So what did you do? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you compare it to a death, because I do want to just comment on that, because it is really interesting and I'll get into our program later, but when we talk about climate grief, we compare it to other types of grief, because most people are familiar with, losing a loved one or a beloved animal companion. But often, not in every case, but many deaths are a little bit more straightforward. And there's the primary feeling is loss.
Mm-hmm.
But with climate grief, it's a constellation of really complicated emotions because there is, of course, tremendous loss, but then there's anger. I felt rageful. I think it was around that time that it came out that BP had known much earlier about the impacts of the fossil fuel industry, rage at politicians for not doing more. So there's rage, there's of course the loss, there's terror. I mean, waking up and feeling terrified at night about what's going to happen to our children, and then guilt, right? Like all of us are doing this. We're constantly having to make choices and feel like we're compromising. Do we fly across the country to see our dying grandmother and then know that our carbon footprint is higher? Are we doing enough? Are we being active enough? So it's a really complex set of feelings. So it's great that you asked that question because we went through so much of that. And Tom and I were not on the same page all the time by any means. And we considered staying and figuring out, well, could we just do dryland crops here? We looked at properties on the coast to leave the area. So we spent, probably a year. And again, that was a year that we were able to have. That was a privilege in a way that we could take our time to sift through this complexity of emotions and decide what our next move was.
Yeah, I want to add to that when you were talking about that constellation of emotions and the one that you put in there of terror. I just want to highlight that one because, I'm in the same state and the whole region was affected by that heat dome. I think it got to maybe 117 at our farm here, a little farther north than you. And the heat went all the way up into British Columbia, and up there the temperatures were even higher. They get on to the 120s in a region where people don't even have an air conditioning because it's so atypical to get even over 90. And there were people who just died. And it was the first time that in thinking about the future of climate change that I'd ever had the thought of, I thought about drought, I thought about extreme weather, but I had not yet thought about literally just temperatures so hot that they kill us. And that was a terrifying thought. And yeah, it was like out of some kind of apocalyptic movie, just thinking about that. And the whole region was affected.
Absolutely.
It's on the scheme of things, it's like you say, it's a smaller thing, but like our household cat died as a result of that heat dome. He was 17 and didn't want to stay inside. He was an indoor-outdoor farm cat, and we didn't have any context for they were predicting these high temperatures, but not ever having lived through that. I didn't have any context for how 115 would feel different than 105. It was so hot that I was on our back porch cooking because we cooked outside during that. And we have concrete and I was wearing sandals and I burnt the bottom of my feet.
Yeah.
And that was in the shade wearing sandals on concrete. It felt like I had been on the beach all day. You know what I mean? When you're barefoot on the beach and your feet that's how my feet felt in the shade on our back porch wearing sandals.
I think it was a watershed moment for people because that heat dome comes up so much in these climate grief classes that we've been offering as this touchstone moment where people witnessed really painful kinds of losses and then, realized kind of what the future could hold, that we're kind of looking at that right now.
Yeah, it was for sure an intense experience. I'm grateful that we haven't had something quite like that. I was like, is this going to become a yearly event? We're now in
Yes, I know.
We're now in 2024, 3 years out, and that is so far, knock on wood, not been quite recreated in the same way.
Yeah, I remember thinking too, because it started in June,
it was
late June and went into July. And I remember thinking, if this is June, what the hell is August going to look like?
Yeah, and that year, I remember after a couple of weeks seeing that a lot of the conifer trees had orange on them. And I thought, did we just kill every conifer tree in the region? Thankfully, that is not what happened, but they've recovered. But it was big. It was a big moment. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free.
If you're looking for something new in vegetables, those novel, high-quality varieties that appeal to today's fresh market shoppers, then it's time to explore Pan American Seed Vegetables. Pan American Seed offers vegetable varieties that are specially selected for earlier and longer harvests with loads of flavorful produce to sell, better disease resistance, and plant habits that fit smaller, more versatile growing spaces. To help make your choices for vegetable programs easier, Pan American Seed has grouped its full catalog assortment into 4 categories using easy-to-identify symbols. There's basket bites for trailing vegetables, patio picks for large containers, ground breakers with in-the-ground plant performance, and finally, kitchen minis, which are compact tabletop herbs and veggies for small space growing. Download the latest Pan American Seed Vegetables brochure at panamseed.com/vegetables and reach out to your preferred seed supplier to place your order today. Today's episode of the Growing for Market podcast is brought to you by BCS America. On our farm, we've had our BCS two-wheel tractor for over a decade, and with no belts to slip, its all-gear-driven construction is still going strong. Though we originally got it for rototilling, we kept it even when we went mostly no-till because it can do so many other things around the farm. From snow blowing, to making raised beds with the rotary plow, to chipping wood, it can do just about anything you might need on a farm with the right attachment. Need to shred a cover crop? A BCS flail mower will make quick work of even the most vigorous cover crop and chop it up so it breaks down quickly. Want to stir in compost or amendments without inverting soil layers? A power harrow turns your BCS into a precise tilthing machine with depth control so you don't mix deeper than you want to. With so many attachments to choose from, it truly is the Swiss Army knife of farm implements. It's why, instead of saying two-wheel tractor, so many people just say BCS. Tractors and attachments are on sale through the end of the year. Visit bcsamerica.com to find sale pricing and your nearest dealer.
Hi there, I'm Lindsay Lusher-Shute from Hardy Roots Farm. There are a lot of farm sales platforms out there, but there's only one that's cooperatively owned by farmers. That's Grown By, your all-in-one solution to simplify farm sales. From startup market farms to complex and scaled-up CSAs like mine, Grown By makes online farm sales easy and affordable. Built a beautiful storefront with our dedicated support team who have years of farming experience. They'll be with you every step of the way. Selling on Grown By is truly affordable. Setting up your shop is totally free, and you pay only when you sell. More than half of all platform and credit card processing fees are paid for by Grown By customers, helping farmers keep more cash in their own pockets. Grown By doesn't just make selling food online accessible to farmers. Grown By makes farm food accessible to all. In a partnership with the USDA and MarketLink, Grown By will help you authorize your farm to accept SNAP online for free. Ready to put your best food forward? Join over 900 farms who have already signed up for Grown By. And don't forget, you're eligible to join the co-op and become a member owner after your first sale. Visit grownby.com to get started. That's GROWNBY.com.
And now, back to the show. So you looked at land on the coast. What did you finally decide to do?
We decided to stay in the Applegate Valley. We moved about 15 miles away to a property that has much more water. The soil is not as good as we thought. It's pretty good, and we'll be able to make it better. But it's a lot smaller too. It was really interesting that you bring up trees because Wolf Gulch has about 120 acres of forest. And some of that is kind of oak savanna. And there's quite a lot of madrone, but there are a lot of Doug fir and ponderosa pine. And also in that same kind of time frame, those 2019 to 2022, we started to see die off, especially of the Doug fir from beetle damage because they were drought stressed. And yeah, seeing just swaths of dead trees, standing dead trees, was part of that grief that came up. And so it was really interesting in looking at properties because ultimately we were really, one of our big variables that we were considering was the makeup of the forest. So we ended up buying a property that has some oak savanna. But we looked at a different property that the woodland portion of the property was Doug fir. And we thought, no, we should be in oak savanna. So it was it was like a different criteria. I was like, oh, this is interesting that now we're considering this as part of trying to find a place that's going to be more resilient. So, but to answer your question, we ended up, I mean, part of it is I've worked for OSU, as you mentioned, for 17 years in Southern Oregon. I have a career here at this point. And more than that, we have such a strong community here of farmers and friends and family. And we kind of felt like, gosh, if we're about to go through this major crisis, let's do it with the people that we've built these long-term relationships with.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something sort of philosophical. It was hard enough to leave Wolf Gulch, but then to leave the region felt a little like, I don't know, it just didn't feel right for the kind of the values I talked about picking a place. And I remember I had this thought with Wolf Gulch that, and I might cry because obviously it's very emotional, but I had this sense that it was like Wolf Gulch was on hospice and we were leaving. And I was like, we should be here. I felt like we should be here to witness and not, you don't leave someone on their deathbed because it's painful to watch them die. But then it was so great because our daughter, who's now 25, who you know, she is a forest ecologist. And she said to me, Mom, the forest isn't dying, it's changing.
Mm-hmm.
She said, they're not going to be Doug fir here anymore, and probably not ponderosa pine, but there'll be pinyon pine and there'll be oak. And so she really helped me reframe, not to say like this isn't devastating, but that, the earth is scrappy. The earth is going to be here no matter what happens to us, and the ecology will evolve. So it was an interesting reframe of thinking of like our land is on hospice and dying. And she was saying it's really just changing. So
yeah. Mm-hmm. That is the best way to look at it for sure, with all these regional changes. And are you picking back up with the farming? Like, are you doing the seed crops on the new land? And
yeah, we actually, one of the beautiful things that happened that summer of 21, when we really kind of decided we couldn't stay at that property and we were letting our friends know and our neighbors. And so many people said, listen, I've got acreage you could lease. And we ended up starting to farm in 22 on a neighbor's property, and they live on the Applegate River and have beautiful topsoil and not a lot of weeds. It was kind of a revelation to be farming in a place where it's like, we have great soil and water and no weeds. Like, what have we been doing the last 25 years, making life really difficult for ourselves?
wow, no weeds. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it had been in pasture, and they had just taken really good care of the pasture. And yeah, it was amazing. So we're continuing to lease. We just trade with them for food. They're so happy to have the land worked. And Tom actually does a lot of flower seed crops. So there's a huge patch of zinnias and cosmos and some amaranth. So it's gorgeous. So they're thrilled to have us there. So we're continuing to farm there, and then as well on our new property, which is about a 5-minute drive apart.
Lovely.
And when you know about seed farming, you know that certain crops require isolation. So for the first time, we're able to grow 2 corn seed crops because we have properties that are far enough apart. So that's an advantage. But yeah, we're continuing to farm. There was really not a pause.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I suppose that is the benefit of having put down those roots in terms of the people in a place that they can help fill in the gaps and provide resources when they're needed.
Yes, definitely. Yeah,
And do you mind me asking, what's the situation with the land at Wolf Gulch Farm now? I mean, if there's no water, there's still a housing there. So are there people who are interested in living there and managing it differently, or?
Yeah, well, we still own the property. We are planning to sell it in the spring. And we have 5 rentals there because I mentioned we bought the property with my mom and my sister and my mom. And so we had multiple dwellings and a couple of yurts. So we actually have some really great rental income from there right now. And there's a domestic well, and there's still the ponds that do collect rainwater. So we estimate you could probably grow an acre of a home garden there comfortably with the amount of water. And so there's definitely enough water for homesteading, just not farming.
Right.
Unless you wanted to just commit to growing crops that didn't need irrigation. And we have been growing increasingly for a great nonprofit. I want to make a plug for them. They're called the Understory Project, and they are collecting and growing native seeds. So they're doing a lot of seed collecting for different restoration projects. They've been providing a lot of seed for the Klamath Dam removal and restoration project. And most of their crops require no irrigation because they're all native. So we are growing for them actually here at the new property. But that's, for example, that could be an enterprise someone could grow at Wolf Gulch without a lot of water.
But realistically, it's more of a homestead property at this point with the water situation, which is different than your goals on the plow. That makes sense. Well, I hope that it finds a wonderful new family to steward it in that way in the future.
We do too. Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift a little bit to talking about the Small Farms program in Oregon and this new program that you started, the Climate Grief and Support Initiative. Can you tell us about it, what it's doing in the community, how it works?
Yeah, like I said, after my experience, I actually went through a climate grief group that I found online through a group called The Work That Reconnects that was started by Joanna Macy, who some people may be familiar with. And I got introduced to these concepts, and then I became a facilitator. I went through a facilitator training, and then I started with a friend of mine who's a mental health professional and has worked in the climate realm as well. We offered a few different classes, or not even classes, just kind of workshops in our community with our friends and neighbors than anything. So I was pretty familiar with this idea of working with climate grief. And then I started realizing that a lot of the farmers that I taught and worked with and consulted with were also going through various forms of climate stress, anxiety, grief. And I realized that I could potentially bring the work into my job at OSU. And I was a little hesitant because I was concerned that it was a little bit too kind of touchy-feely, or it wouldn't be received well at this land-grant university. But I actually found pretty instantly people were interested and supportive. And so about a year ago, I assembled a team, someone from community and health who has a mental health background. And she also does a lot of evaluation work for different programs. And then I brought in someone from campus who's a curriculum designer, and she works specifically with farmers. So developing farmer-centered, farmer-led curriculum. And then brought in a couple of partners from outside the university, another mental health counselor, and then someone who works in the realm of climate and ag as an educator. So the five of us kind of started the team. We got some initial pilot money to write a 30-minute kind of curriculum. So the assumption that I came into is that farmers are not going to show up for a half day or a full day workshop on climate grief. It's not practical enough. In my experience, farmers are very solution driven. They're pragmatic. They want to figure out how to keep moving forward and farm. And so I felt like they're not going to show up to something around climate emotion. So my concept was to develop a 30-minute mini module that could just be inserted into other programming. So let's say an extension professional in Burns, Oregon is going to have a full day workshop on the latest irrigation solutions and technology. And they could do a little half-hour talk on what is climate grief, what is climate stress, how do they differ from other types of grief, how do they impact farmers, what are some coping strategies, and just keep it really brief, like a little teaser or a PSA, and then be able to direct them to other resources. So we developed that. We piloted it 3 times last fall, and we surveyed people, and I think over 90% of the respondents said they wanted more. They would be really interested in more education. So from there, we went into developing a 90-minute and a 3-hour module. And then now we're working on a train the trainer, so we can actually go and let other extension folks and other agency folks and other people just give them some resources on how to roll out some of this information.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like something that is not useful just specifically in Oregon. There are people dealing with
Yeah.
their own climate grief all across the country and the world. So, I mean, I've just have been seeing on my Instagram just recently farmers like imagery of floods in the Carolinas and pigs just in the water. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. So,
Yeah. And it's so interesting because, like, I was talking to a farmer in Vermont, and she described waking up in the night and hearing rain and having this sense of dread fill her body. Like, how long is it going to keep rain? Because they've had such bad flooding. And I was thinking of the irony that when I wake up in the night and I hear rain, my whole body relaxes, and I'm like, oh, everything's going to be okay. It's raining. And I was like, isn't that fascinating that it's the same natural phenomenon, but the meaning that we attach to it and the catastrophizing that happens I found that really fascinating. But yeah, and I'm actually working right now with some folks in New Hampshire on a potential project to get, they're really interested as well in this work. So yeah, there's definitely national, international significance. And there isn't, as far as I can see, there's not a lot of work being done in this realm. There's a lot of work now on mental health and farmers. In Oregon, we have the agri-stress hotline. There's the farm aid hotline. Farmers are more likely to die by suicide. And so that's been a huge issue, and that those numbers are increasing. And obviously there's this huge field now of climate psychology, and there are all these climate informed therapists that you can find. So those two, there's a lot happening in both those worlds, but the intersection of those, I don't see a ton of work on yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think even the language you're putting around it, climate grief, positions it a little differently too, in that it's not like, and this is not my area of expertise, but when I hear, for example, mental health, I think of something that maybe is coming from inside me.
Mm-hmm.
But when you put it as climate grief, then it's more about the things outside of me and how those are affecting me, my community, my family. And I mean, grief is a real human process that we go through stemming from loss or hard events. It's not, and I think maybe that might make it more, what I'm getting at here is that for especially older farmers or generations that maybe have some stigma still associated with mental health issues, this might make it more accessible, because grief is something that happens to everyone. It's part of being human.
That's such a great point, Katie. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
I wish there weren't stigmas on mental health issues, but there still are. And not everybody will identify with that if they otherwise in their life maybe don't naturally deal with anxiety or depression. They might not recognize in themselves that they are going through grief.
That's right. Yeah. And one of the things we really underscore anytime I talk about this in classes or with anyone, I just want to highlight the fact that this is a natural response. There is nothing pathological about all of these feelings. It's appropriate. And it's actually not just appropriate, it's a good sign if you're feeling these things, because we're losing so much. And we have a lot of anticipated loss as well. And so this is like the right response. I mean, right is a loaded term, but it's appropriate. It's heartening. It shows that you care. I mean, grief is really about love. And so it's like the healthiest response to this type of loss is to have these, intense feelings of grief.
Yeah.
And I also want to just mention, since you brought up this whole theme, is like, for like our white culture, this is the first kind of experience that we're having of this type of collective trauma. I mean, we've seen very little war on our soils for a century or whatever, over a century. And so we haven't had this kind of like collective trauma before. And so when you see that in war-torn countries, it's like most people are traumatized. Most people are dealing with anxiety or depression that's based on this like larger force. And obviously, we have a lot of people in this country that have dealt with systemic racism and genocide and all kinds of collective trauma, but many of us haven't before. And so this is new. And to really, like you're saying, kind of validate, like, yeah, we're all going to be experiencing this depression, anxiety, stress, because we're going through this unprecedented time for us.
Yes, I'd say that for many people in the US, probably the first collective trauma they really recognized happening was the 2020 pandemic experience. And
Yes,
then that
yes.
was paired here in many regions with a lot of these climate events. Was a real whammy of a couple years there for sure.
Sure was. Yeah.
So, what have been some of the reactions to the climate grief events? What kind of stories are you guys hearing from people?
It's been so powerful. We've gotten such amazing responses from people. I think just to outline a little bit of what we've been doing. So we have a few slides around, what is climate grief? As I mentioned, how does it differ from other types of grief? How does it impact farmers in particular? And then we talk a little bit. There's a great, if people want to look it up, or I could send you the resource. There's something called a climate emotions wheel. And it's a colored wheel, and it has kind of 4 quadrants that are broken into anger, sadness, fear, and positivity. And then it just lists all these different emotions that come up for people commonly around the climate. So getting people to sort of have a little bit of literacy around naming these different, like I said, this constellation of emotions. And then we go into some experiential pieces. And one of them is we ask people to share a specific loss they've had to climate change. Because I think one of the things that's really common is it's so overwhelming. The breadth, the scope, the scale of what we're losing is so tremendous that it's easy to just like numb out and kind of dissociate in a way. And, you think about like the Great Barrier Reef dying, you think about the polar bears, you think about the permafrost, and it's so much that we can't even really experience any of the feelings. And so what we find is that if people choose that one specific thing that they have lost personally, like you talked about losing your 17-year-old cat. And often people will say like, oh, this is a no big deal. But actually like those really specific losses are the way into our feelings. And so that's really powerful. And the things people share are heartbreaking, and the specificity, like some examples are like someone talked about how their family would do this big fish fry every Friday night. And then the lake that they would fish in was too warm to sustain life anymore. So they not only did they lose, there are no more fish in that lake, but they've also lost this whole family tradition. So the family no longer gathers to do these fish fries on Friday. And that's what we would call like a secondary or tertiary grief, because the fish is the primary, and then all of the cultural practices and these other things that are associated with it that also go away when you lose the fish.
I just want to interject here with one that you and I share, just to add to the terror that was 2020 and 2021. Here in the Northwest, we also had the 2020 Labor Day fires, conflagrations, which were really terrifying. And the wildfires got much closer to places in the valley than they ever have before. But the whole Santiam Canyon burned. So for people who aren't familiar with the area, this is the Cascades just east of the Willamette Valley, so not too far from Portland, Oregon, or Salem, Oregon. And just, it's like a bomb went off in this region. And this is a place where you and I used to meet every February at a series of cabins that all burned to the ground. So that whole gathering where farmers would meet every winter has never
exactly
been revived. So yes, naming that, like, here's the loss, and then here's the losses that stem from that loss. This community of farmers haven't really rallied again in the same way since we lost our cabins to that fire. Oof. Anyhow.
Yes. Yeah. So you get a room full of people sharing these specific losses, and it sounds awful, right? It sounds like some kind of hell. But it's so beautiful because people, for one, they get to be in a space where they're being asked. Because so often you go to a party, no one wants to talk about climate change. It's so depressing. And then it's like the solidarity, there's this like intimacy and solidarity that forms in the group. And it is it is really beautiful. There's tears and people express anger, fear, all of it. There's always talk about, my kids, I can't let them play outside in the summers.
Because of the smoke.
So much. The smoke. Yeah. Thank you. The smoke. Yeah. So we do that, and that sounds awful, but it's amazing actually. And then we go into resilience strategies. So our approach is like strengths-based. We are all inherently resilient. We are in this class. We are still farming. We are not like in a fetal position, and which is also fine. That can be an important part of all this as well. But the point is we do have strategies. So let's share them. And so then we do like a brainstorm where people share, like, how do you get through these days? Because really the more, I'm doing this kind of crash course in climate psychology. And what I'm learning more and more is like, there's obviously no answer, but what it is that we are going to be toggling back and forth more and more between these states of distress and these states of resilience. And the ability to toggle back and forth and to learn how to do that is actually strengthening.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we do that? And especially, how do we do that as farmers, right? Like, it might be prohibitive to have a therapist or to go to yoga class every day,
right.
Or, but are there ways that we can build into our busy schedules? And generally speaking, these states of resilience, I'm going to call them, have to do with connecting with nature. And many farmers have pointed out this is connecting with nature that you're not in charge of.
Right.
Connecting with nature, connecting with other people, community, family, self-regulation practices, taking action. So actually doing some advocacy work can feel really empowering and can build our sense of resilience. So I have a list here. I thought I would this was like from one of the last, this is just a random group. So we do this every time, but this is what people came up with. Walk barefoot, take classes and find like-minded people, creative outlets, happy hour with neighbors, mushroom hunting, gratitude practice, garden for pollinators, make donations, sleep outside and watch the sunrise, daily yoga practice, annual fishing and hunting trips, focus on here and now, learn about ancestry, therapy, promote WaterWise program, find your community, little acts of stewardship like making mason bee houses and habitat piles, learn new skills, celebrate the small wins, limit notifications on phone, feed elderly neighbors, vote, garden with rainwater, learn and connect with indigenous wisdom, put land back in hands of Native people, focus on things I can have a tangible impact on, seek out opportunities for joy, laughter, healthy escapism, tapping into art.
It's a great list.
Yeah. And that's just the last group that was the last group I worked with.
Wise farmers.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, speaking of wise farmers, so we've already touched on this a little bit, like with the cabins and the lake and the fishing, but this is way bigger than just our farms, right? We're talking about whole regions being changed. Here in the Northwest, that's a lot about drought, wildfire, but as we mentioned, on the eastern coast, it's more about floods. I mean, whatever it is that we're dealing with, we see big regional changes. I'm curious if you think that farmers specifically have an important role to play in helping our larger communities who maybe are less aware of natural cycles process and name some of the grief that might be affecting everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question, and I definitely thought about it. And yeah, I do think that close connection with the natural world is certainly, not just farmers, or certainly other folks, foresters and fisher people, but certainly farmers are very tied into natural systems. And I think that's part of why we're so impacted by climate change, because we're seeing on a moment by moment level the way things are being affected. And we also are outside. So we're directly experiencing those extreme temperatures and weather events, and they're impacting our livelihood and our properties and all of that. So yeah, certainly I think there's a lot for farmers to teach But I think maybe more than that is people often have this idea that farmers are stoic. And I think that there's truth in that. And I would also say that farmers are, I would call it like pragmatic and practical and solution oriented problem solving. And so I think that that's really important as well, because there's this way that I think people can go into paralysis when they think about climate change. And a very human reaction would be, okay, I'm just going to like be in a climate controlled environment. I'm going to be on my screen where I can control things. And farmers are really out there interacting with the natural world that is being so devastated by climate change and finding the places where they can actually make changes. So Tom and I have been reading a lot about Stoic philosophy in the past couple of years as we've gone through this, and found a lot of solace in this idea of starting with yourself and your own actions and realizing that's really what you have control over. So it's this kind of discernment between what is beyond our control and what is within our control. And I think so much of the time we're spending our energy thinking about and worrying about all these things we can't control. And that energy could all be spent on what we can control. And so I think farmers just like naturally do that, because so much typically goes wrong during any given season, that there is this kind of fortitude, there's this persistence, like making the choice in the moment about what we're going to sacrifice, what we're going to focus on, and continuing to move forward. And I think I think everyone is going to need to kind of absorb some of that ethic. And I think that's what really farmers have to teach more than anything, is that ability to move forward in the face of challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So farmers, we're going to be some leaders in our communities, it sounds like, in some of this stuff. I feel like you've already touched on this a little bit in describing the workshops, but I want to give you an opportunity to maybe talk about even more. What have been some of the positive outcomes from the project so far? Maybe things that you see happening down the road for people after the workshops, or responses you've had after?
Yeah, inevitably at the end of the workshop, there's a lot of people exchanging phone numbers and emails, people wanting to connect more afterwards. I think when you start opening up some of these more emotional conversations where people are sharing personal experiences, it is this opportunity to build more community. And that, again, I think is like going to be really what we are going to have to move increasingly towards, is these relationships of interconnectedness. I think there are farmers that just want to be on their piece of land and isolate. But I think more and more the farmers that I work with are seeing like, we need to be sharing equipment and information. If a wildfire comes, I need to know which of my neighbors has an extra trailer I can haul my animals off the property with. So I think these meetings where people get together and form these more personal relationships are really going to be foundational for more disaster preparedness in particular. But then also, like you said, like in these moments where we are all having our own personal struggles with climate change, where we can reach out and have these deeper connections where people know us and want to support us.
Yes, connections seem like they're always important in hard times.
Always a good thing. Yeah. And I guess I would also just say, Katie, that to answer that question, we always talk in our sessions about figuring out when you need actual professional help. So one is just like finding a time to sit by the river once a day, or a farmer I know after this workshop, he's like, now I make sure I pet each of my 4 cats every day, because I know that's going to make me feel calm and connected. So there are these little things we can do, but I think it's really important that farmers also be aware of what are the red flags. Like if you can't get out of bed, or if you're not returning phone calls to your family members, or you're really feeling that type of deep depression, when to get professional help, when to seek out suicide prevention measures, and also to be able to see that in your loved ones, the other farmers in your community or your family members. Because like I said, we are seeing greater rates of suicide among farmers. And so that's really important too. And that very much comes out in our programs as well. And like you said, maybe because we're not using the term mental health so much as our lead, at least, maybe we can reach more farmers through this work. and we can do some suicide prevention education as well.
This would probably be a good moment in the podcast to drop the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline number. It's 988. So if you or anybody you know are really struggling, you can call or text 988 and get resources. And again, that's if it's you or somebody you care about. It doesn't have to be you. They can also help walk you through how to support somebody who is maybe having suicidal thoughts or really struggling. So just thought I'd drop that in the podcast, and we'll make sure that's in the show notes too. So for farmers out there who aren't in Oregon and don't necessarily have access to these workshops, you've already listed some great just self-care tips, but are there any DIY tips for people who want to begin working to name and address their own potential climate grief? Like, are there any great books or online events or classes that you would recommend people access?
Yeah, there's lots of great stuff. A couple of books I wanted to recommend are Generation Dread, Finding Purpose in an Age of Climate Crisis. And that's by Britt Ray, spelled W-R-A-Y. And then the other one I love is A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety, How to Keep Your Cool on a Warming Planet. And that's by Sarah Jacquette Ray. So those are two books I would recommend. There's a great project called the All We Can Save Project, and they offer classes as well. And this is all on our webpage.
Okay.
So we have a resource section. So that one's great. The Climate Psychology Alliance also has some great resources. They offer these free climate cafes where you can talk to other people about your climate emotions. They have a therapist list as well of climate aware therapists. And then we have a Commons library as well on our website that has some other resources.
We'll make sure that's in the show notes so people can go and access those resources if they weren't able to write those down while they're listening.
Yeah. You can always Google OSU Extension Climate Stress and Grief, and that would get you right to us as well.
Perfect. That is an easy way. Maud, what else would you like people to know about the project or climate grief that we haven't touched on yet in the conversation?
You know, we're in the process of doing some research right now. We got funding to do in-depth interviews and focus groups with 50 farmers in Oregon to find out how they are being affected by climate change, particularly in the mental and emotional health realms. And then finding out what the barriers are to getting support, and then finding out what kind of support would be useful to them. So I would say those are big questions we have right now. And if you have feedback and want to email me any thoughts you have on that, because really we want to just support as many farmers as we can right now. We're coming into these really difficult times. And more than ever, we need all these people, these farmers who are familiar with systems and are intimately connected with our planet in this way and providing all this food and fiber for us. So that really is the highest goal. And if people have thoughts, we're really all ears on how to reach folks. I think from what I've seen in the research, the best ways to support people through climate grief and stress are in groups and not necessarily in one-on-one therapeutic relationships. So we like this group model, but also recognize that a lot of farmers are, maybe more reticent to talk in groups. Time is obviously always a constraint. So we're really open to feedback. We want to figure out how to serve as many farmers as possible.
Okay, great. So then if people wanted to reach you or the project to connect about that or just to learn more, we'll make sure the URL is in the show notes, but also they could just go ahead and search for OSU Small Farms Climate Grief.
Absolutely.
And they'd probably find you. And your email would be on there too?
Yes, definitely. Okay. Yeah. And I guess I'd also just want to say, the way that we're trying to frame this is that climate change and these climate emotions, they can really impact, job performance. So really we're seeing this as a way to be a better farmer is to start naming, validating, and processing some of these feelings and building that resilience. So just wanted to kind of say that, because I think the question we often get is is this going to make me a better farmer? And I think that can be kind of a difficult question to answer. And so we're really trying to frame this as, yes, to be a more resilient person, you will be a better farmer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a book coming out this fall, and it's about farming and parenting, which
Nice.
can be a stressful combination. So I have a whole chapter about, dealing with stress and, like you were saying, looking
Awesome.
for those
I have to
warning
read it.
signs, right? So I compiled those from various extension bulletins about farmers and stress. But, some of the warning signs for when you need professional help for farmers are things like not caring for your animals well, or not doing maintenance on your vehicles, or not speaking respectfully to your family or employees. And so, like you're saying, if we're not addressing what could be a profound level of underlying anxiety or depression or anger, it can absolutely affect the way that we care for our farm, the plants, the machinery, the people. I put machinery before people. I shouldn't do that. But, all the moving parts of a farm, including people and other living beings. And so it absolutely is an important priority to make sure we're taking care of ourselves so we can take care of the other creatures and people who are in our care. So,
Cool.
thank you so much, Maud.
Can't wait to read your book.
Yeah, we're going to do a whole other podcast about that. But
Good. Yay.
I really appreciate you doing this work and learning from your experience and thinking not just that it's your own personal story, but thinking bigger and knowing that it affects other people in your community and putting this together, and especially in ways that hopefully we'll be able to help other regions too. I look forward to hearing more of how this project continues to grow and evolve. And thank you so much for sharing with our audience about it today, Maud.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and information from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and you haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never get billed. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 per year, you get a year of the magazine, plus over 150 back issues from the last 15 years. Head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.